When you say the party is self-destructing, what do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Well, you've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist, a problem. I mean, this is not exactly the people you want in your party. Buchanan's a disaster, as we've, covered.
Jesse.
The media threw gasoline on the fire. Now they're complaining it's too hot. I think the percentage of the white supremacist population in this country is 0.03%. And the media treats these people like they have a lot of juice. Antifa, the media has totally sanitized these people. They don't even interview them. I haven't seen one legitimate news interview with an Antifa member, and they're all the way out there. They're everywhere. And then Black Lives Matter, they've elevated that group big time, and they're responsible for a lot of violent acts. So you have this kind of tribal collision course in Charlotte where all of these people descend onto one place in a very lackadaisical police department, and it's a powder keg. Now, Trump has been called a Nazi for a year by the media. A Nazi commits a crime. Now Trump is an accessory to the crime. That's outrageous. And for a decade, the media has pushed that white privilege needs to be eradicated. Now they say speech and certain symbols need to be eradicated. But then you have a lot of these, quote, marginalized groups that, they can do anything. They can riot, they can break the law, they can yell, and they can scream, and they can block traffic, but they're righteous because they have justice on their side. So when the media creates division, they do that to create conflict, because conflict creates results for the left. Because eventually the culture's like, you know what, I don't want to deal with it.
Yesterday, roughly 80% of total airtime of the non-cable network news was devoted to Donald Trump's presser. Now, I get it. This is red meat that drives the storyline of a racist president. A racist president we all helped elect. All the networks were there. It's weird. As the media pines for unity, they foment friction. Go outside for a minute, though, and everything seems fine. But turn on the TV, race war is coming. By attributing the acts of ghoulish racists to a party or large swaths of America, they steer us away from civility on toward fury. The media has different rules depending on the guy. I remember one network linking the shooting of Stephen Scalise to his voting record. How is that not condemning both sides? And if you point out the past violence of Antifa, of course that now means you endorse Nazis. I don't know how you get there. Anyway, Americans can handle far more than the media's binary thinking. We know ugliness when we see it. And that tribalism leads to harm. By removing the communicative step between emotion and violence, we're left with fringe maniacs in bike helmets. My dream that the media steps out of its team sport thinking and examines how they increase division. Whether it's white nationalists, black power groups, anarchists, Antifa, or Aryan nations. The appeal of superiority through identity, that's the disease. By linking toxic tribes to large parties, all the media does is help it spread. Instead, let's isolate and quarantine it.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Now, all weekend long, I, like many of you, watched the media going insane, acting like they didn't know what the president was talking about. They ran with a false narrative all weekend. Oh, big story. He didn't mention the groups by name. Well, it couldn't be more obvious, more transparent who the president was talking about.
No, it's spot on, Sean. The liberal media couldn't control themselves. They couldn't resist the opportunity to somehow turn this on President Trump. I was proud of the original statement. He knows, the president, you have to be measured, you have to be calm, you want to calm the waters, you want to be thoughtful in your initial statement because it's early on and you don't have all the facts and you don't want to speak out of hand. Then over the weekend, as he learned more facts, he came out today and reiterated what he said in even some more forceful terms. I was proud of the way he handled that. But again, they took this ugly situation. There's no winners in Charlottesville. It was hate versus hate. You had the neo-Nazis, you had Antifa, you had Black Lives Matter clashing. There's just no winners there. But every time one of these situations happens, you see the worst of people sometimes. I think we saw it out of the left.
Larry Elder, we've known each other for going back a couple of decades now.
Right.
You have taken a lot of heat over a very long, successful career for pointing out a lot of the things I tried to mention in this monologue.
Right.
Why the double standard? Have you figured it out?
I haven't been able to figure it out, but I'll tell you, 1963, I'm 12 years old. Governor George Wallace, a Democrat, stands in front of a school door and defends segregation. Fast forward, Sean, 28 years later, David Duke runs as a Republican, gets zero support from the Congress for his candidacy. The RNC puts out a statement blasting his candidacy. George Herbert Walker Bush called him a racist. The only time we ever see David Duke again is when the cable news digs him up. The man hasn't been relevant in decades. And the reason for all of this attention, the reason the media is covering this thing like it's a Super Bowl, is because of this narrative that Donald Trump blatantly reached out to white racists to get elected. If that's the case, how is it that he got less percentage of white voters than Mitt Romney did, a greater percentage of minority voters, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians than Mitt Romney did? The blacks, Hispanics, and Asians were too stupid to realize they were joining a movement with a bunch of white racists, and the white racists were too stupid to realize they were joining a movement with a bunch of people of color that they don't like. Come on.
I know Donald Trump, President Trump now, I know him personally. Look, he does not have a racist bone in his body. As a matter of fact, back in the 90s, he was awarded in New York, along with Rosa Parks and Muhammad Ali. They were given awards for their contribution to the black community in New York City. So, this is just a made-up narrative. But like I said, I thought it was pretty embarrassing, too, that politicians on both sides of the board couldn't get to a microphone or a camera fast enough to flaunt their racial sensitivity and their moral superiority out of this thing, when, like I said, it was an ugly situation. And instead of waiting for this thing to settle down and hold the people accountable who should be held accountable, like I said, you get hate versus hate there. No, they all said, hey, there's a political opportunity here, but especially on the left, every chance they get, no matter what President Trump would have said, it wouldn't have drawn any applause from the left. That's just the way that they are right now. But again, I thought what he said was measured. It was thoughtful. It was very presidential, and it calmed the waters, unlike his predecessor, Barack Obama, who after every one of these situations poured hot sauce on a simmering situation.
Right. And the president jumped the gun on all those cases and ended up, four-time loser on Cambridge, on Trayvon Martin, on Ferguson, on Freddie Gray, Baltimore, Larry Elder. What about CNN commentator, Trump is unfit to be human? Human.
Right.
And how about Donnie Deutsch on NBC, Trump's a sniveling coward and a racist.
Right. And
wow.
Anderson Cooper,
imagine if a conservative said that about Obama.
Right. Let's condemn all bigots, whether it's David Duke or whether it's Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters has never seen a Republican president she hasn't called a racist. The other day, she even called Alan Dershowitz a racist. And what about the 50-plus visits that one of the nation's biggest anti-Semites, Al Sharpton, made to Obama's White House? Why wasn't the concern about bigoted media calling out Obama for inviting this man that a local Jewish leader accused of fomenting the greatest pogrom in the history of America, the Crown Heights riots? Why weren't the media condemning these kinds of things? This is the kind of double standard that drives people like Donald Trump crazy, and I don't blame him.
What do you think? I'll give you the final word tonight to DeRoy.
Yeah, if Donald Trump really is this white supremacist, why did he go campaign in black neighborhoods last fall? He spoke in a black church. He went to a school choice setting in Cleveland. He won 8% of the black vote. That's not a huge number, but that's 1/3 more than Mitt Romney did, who got 6. And he's really dedicated his presidency to school choice, to expanding options for black families to send their parents, or send their kids rather, somewhere they actually might learn something. So despite all these claims by the left that he's a white supremacist, here's a Republican who actually has reached out for black support and gotten it.
All right, guys. How many in the media covered Ayers and Dorn? Well, that's where President Obama started his political career. What about the Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, who called white people the devil, the skunk of the planet Earth, and has said many racist, anti-Semitic things, too many to count? Recent report, Daily Caller, well, they're saying that Farrakhan is claiming, and there's audio of it, that he met privately with then-Senator Barack Obama, 2008, before he announced his presidential run, and he said that the Nation of Islam supported Barack Obama quietly for president, and when he was a community organizer. Now, of course, as the Daily Caller pointed out, neither Obama or Farrakhan want to talk about that friendship. Has there been any investigation by the media? Pretty shocking. Well, the media didn't think it was important for you to know these things. They didn't cover a lot of those things. Then there's President Obama's handling, remember all the high-profile racial cases when he was president, where he jumped to conclusions, rushed to judgment without facts or information? He's supposed to be a lawyer, too. Watch this.
The Cambridge police acted stupidly. There is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. And that's just a fact. The African American community is also knowledgeable that there is a history of racial disparities in the application of our criminal laws.
And President Obama also had members from the group. Remember Black Lives Matter? People chanting things like pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, talking about cops, or where they talked about, what do we want, dead cops? When do we want them now? Oh, they were invited to the White House where the president praised that group. Take a look.
We've also got some young people here who are making history as we speak. People like Brittany, who served on our police task force in the wake of Ferguson and has led many of the protests that took place there and shined a light on the injustice that was happening. People like DeRay McKesson, who's done some outstanding work mobilizing in Baltimore around these issues.
Remember Hillary Clinton running for president? She praised Black Lives Matter. The same people. What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now? Watch her.
And we do have to stand up and say loudly and clearly, Black Lives Matter.
There's a long list. We need a new deal for communities of color.
Senator Webb, you ever see the media talk about these things? This is why shows like this, in my opinion, are different from the liberal mainstream media. They've ignored these examples for decades. They don't seem to care about the threats of violence that have been made repeatedly against our current president, President Trump. Remember, this photo was so graphic, we always have to issue the warning. It shows Kathy Griffin posing ISIS fighter, bloody, severed head of President Trump, Johnny Depp talking about killing a president, Madonna talking about blowing up the Trump White House. Really? Take a look.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? I want to clarify, I'm not an actor. I lie for a living. However, it's been a while. And maybe it's time.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Imagine, God forbid, somebody said that in the Obama years. Then there's Shakespeare in the Park, that performance showing a Trump-like person being brutally stabbed to death. Also other celebrities, Snoop Dogg, Mickey Rourke, advocating for violence against the president. What about, remember the Bernie Sanders supporter, the one that targeted Republicans at baseball practice, leaving Congressman Steve Scalise fighting for his life? Well, was the media blaming Democrats for that? No. And by the way, they shouldn't have. And I don't blame Bernie either. Now, by the way, the left is totally unhinged at this point. This is sadly who they are, the double standard they adopt. And by the way, after all these examples where Democrats line up to condemn those people, where are they condemning all the things we're playing tonight? You see, they got a separate set of rules for Republicans and Democrats. Every 2 to 4 years, Democrats divide the country. They play identity politics. It's been a part of this playbook the Democrats use for generations. So it's time for the Destroy Trump establishment media to start recognizing how they have a massive double standard, that they have an agenda and ideology. Because just like, sadly, white supremacists in Charlottesville, hatred of any kind should not be tolerated or ever given a free pass, period. Whoever's involved in the hatred, like the hate we saw this weekend. Joining us with reaction.
All this week, we've noted that recent attacks on Confederate statues aren't entirely about statues or even about the Confederacy. Instead, they're an effort to abolish the past and to declare it morally worthless and unworthy of respect. The left, we predicted, wouldn't stop with Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson, but would move on to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and more. Twitter called us ridiculous. Well, it took less than 48 hours for reality to catch up to worst-case scenario. In case you weren't watching CNN today, here's what you missed. Keep in mind that Angela Rye, the woman speaking, is not just a CNN contributor. She was the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. She's hardly a fringe figure in the Democratic Party. Watch.
George Washington was a slave owner, and we need to call slave owners out for what they are. Whether we think they were protecting American freedom or not, he wasn't protecting my freedom. I wasn't someone who my ancestors weren't deemed human beings to him. And so to me, I don't care if it's a George Washington statue or a Thomas Jefferson statue or a Robert E. Lee statue. They all need to come down.
Well, Al Sharpton agreed that the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence should lose his memorial.
When you look at the fact that public monuments are supported by public funds, you're asking me to subsidize the insult of my family.
Thomas Jefferson had slaves.
And I would repeat that the public should not be paying to uphold somebody who has had that kind of background.
Oh, but don't think it'll end with the Jefferson Memorial or the Washington Monument. Revolutions aren't like that. Once they gather steam, they tend to go further than anyone expected, as Robespierre found out the hard way. Yesterday on Chicago's South Side, for example, a vandal set fire to another Civil War-era monument, this one to Abraham Lincoln. Yes, that Abraham Lincoln, the one who freed the slaves. By the standards of the modern left, Lincoln is a racist, too. He was willing to pardon the Confederates, for one thing, after killing hundreds of thousands of them. There's no way Abraham Lincoln could work at Google. He'd be hauled into HR and canned on day one. So you can see why liberals felt it was important to burn his likeness. You know where this is going. After sending all the statues to the landfill, it'll be time to rip up our founding documents. If Jefferson is so wicked he doesn't deserve a monument on the Mall, why should we honor the Declaration he wrote? If Madison is evil, why would we adhere to the Constitution? Lincoln spoke in favor of malice toward none and charity toward all, but if he's just some dead white racist, why would we even bother remembering that speech? The truth is, there's not a single person we've given a national holiday to who could withstand this level of moral scrutiny, not one. But we knew that when we decided to honor them. Countries, like people, are works in progress. They don't just exist in the present. Their stability derives from shared traditions and ideals, for respect from what came before. Nihilists don't care about any of that. They want to hit the reset button. They want to declare everything before themselves null and void so they can restart society from the ground up. That's been tried before repeatedly, and it has never once worked, though many millions have died trying it. It won't work this time either. That's worth remembering however you feel about Robert E. Lee statues. And speaking of feelings, a new poll by The Economist and YouGov finds that most Americans are not concerned about Confederate statues or the Confederate flag. 54% of Americans say the statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson represent Southern pride. 26% say they represent racism.